It's Ikemefuna, she managed to say, her words broken by the pain. He laid me on the floor and flogged me like a child. Mama, Ikemefuna flogged me like a child. Once upon a time, in a faraway African kingdom, situated in the eastern parts of Nigeria, a peaceful and breathtaking land, where rivers flowed gently and the grass stretched out in lush green carpets as far as the eye could see. In this beautiful place called Umuike lived a kind and loving couple named Adani and Aduli. They were simple farmers who worked hard every day to grow food on the small piece of land they owned. Even though they were poor and had little, they never let their struggles bring them down. Instead, they found happiness in their love for each other and the simple joy they got from their farm. To them, life was not about riches, but about the bond they shared, and that filled their hearts with contentment. Adane and Aduli were blessed with only one child, a daughter named Aquam. From the moment she was born, it was clear that she was no ordinary girl. Aquam's beauty was so breathtaking and captivating that everyone in the village spoke about her. They often called her Enenebe Jolu, which meant her beauty could make someone stare so long that they would forget what they were doing. She was a sight to behold, so captivating that people would lose track of time just by gazing at her. Aquam had eyes that sparkled like the clear blue rivers that flowed through their land, always shining brightly, full of life and kindness. Her nose stood perfectly, and her lips were like a masterpiece painted by the gods themselves, curving in a way that everyone would think they were beholding the most beautiful work of art. Her skin, smooth and glowing, shimmered as if she used a magical cream sent from heaven. She had a dark long hair that her mother would braid into several beautiful styles. Each time she smiled, it was impossible not to smile back. It was like sunshine bursting through the clouds. Even as a little girl, Aquama was known as the most beautiful girl in the village, admired by everyone who laid eyes on her. To her parents, she was more than just beautiful. Aduli and Adani called Aquama their treasure, the most precious gift the gods had given to them. Though they had little in terms of wealth, the gods had blessed them with something far more priceless, a daughter whose beauty was unmatched and whose presence filled their home with joy and pride. Every night, as the bright moon hung high in the sky, casting its glow over the quiet village, Adane, Adule, and their daughter Aquama would gather in front of their small hut. They would sit together under the stars after a simple dinner, sharing stories, laughter, and love. The cool breeze of the night would brush against their faces as they sat close, enjoying the peace that only nighttime could bring. Adani had a special gift. She could tell the most amazing stories that had been passed down to her by her mother. Her voice was like music, rising and falling with excitement as she told each tale. Sometimes she would break into song, her sweet voice filling not just their little space, but echoing across the village, as if the stories themselves danced with the stars. Her husband, Adule, and little Aquanwa would listen with wide eyes and bright smiles. They laughed so hard whenever Adani reached the funniest parts, their laughter mixing with the soft sounds of the night. Their evenings were always filled with joy, a kind of happiness that warmed their hearts, even when they had little. To Aduli and Adane, their daughter was the most precious thing in the world. They treated Aquam like a rare jewel, making sure she knew every day how special she was to them. But as Aquam grew up, despite all the love her parents gave her, Aquam felt something heavy in her heart, something her parents couldn't fix. She was sad and often lonely. In their village, it was uncommon for families to have only one child. Most homes were full of children playing and laughing together, brothers and sisters always at each other's side. But Aquam had no sibling. She was the only child of her parents, and that made her feel isolated. Her parents tried everything to make her happy. They would play with her, tell her stories, and shower her with love. But no matter what they did, they couldn't feel the emptiness Aquam felt. They couldn't be like her age mates, running around and laughing with her like siblings usually did. Worse still, they wouldn't even let her join the village children when they played at the village square. Her parents were worried. They knew the village children could sometimes be mean, and with no sibling to protect her or stand up for her, they feared Aquam might be bullied. The very thought of their daughter getting hurt broke their hearts, so they kept her close away from the other children. But Aquam didn't agree with their decision. She didn't want to stay hidden away while the rest of the village children played freely under the sun. She wanted to experience the fun, the laughter and the games that the other children enjoyed. She longed to be part of their world, to feel what it was like to run across the village square, chasing after her friends. So, every day, when her parents went to the farm, Aquam would sneak out. She would quietly make her way to the village square, careful not to be seen. There, she would hide behind a tree or wall, watching the other children with longing eyes as they ran, jumped, and played together. She wished she could join them, but her parents' fear always held her back. Instead, she stood in the shadows, dreaming of the day when she too could run free, her heart full of the laughter she so deeply craved. Unknown to Aquam, the village children had already noticed her. Every day, as she hid by the tree watching them play, they saw her. They began to whisper amongst themselves, thinking that Aquam was too proud to join them to play. He thinks she's better than us because she's more beautiful, they would say to each other, their voices filled with jealousy and anger. The sight of her watching from a distance made them feel insulted, as if her beauty was a barrier between her and the rest of the children in the village. We will teach her a bitter lesson, they decided. We will make sure she never forgets that she is no better than us. The more they talked, the angrier they became. How dare she look down on us like that, they fumed. They made a cruel plan. We will scratch her face so badly that her parents won't even recognize her anymore. By the time we are done with her, she will never think she's better than us again. They laughed wickedly, excited by the thought of dealing with Aquam and clipping off her wings. One day, as usual, Aquam hid behind the trees, her eyes filled with longing as she watched the children laugh and play together. She wished she could be one of them, to run and laugh like they did, but today was different. Suddenly, she felt a hand grab her from behind. Startled, she turned around and there, Standing before her were some of the village children. Their faces were twisted with anger, and they held sticks and whips in their hands. Akwanwa's heart raced with fear. She tried to run, but they were too strong. "Leave me alone," she cried, struggling to break free. "I want to go home." "Home?" They mocked her, laughing cruelly. "Where is your home? We are going to deal with you today." Before she knew it, the children began hitting her with their sticks, the blows landing painfully on her body. Aquam screamed in pain, her voice echoing through the trees, but the children only laughed harder. They showed no mercy as they continued to beat her. Meanwhile, in the nearby bushes, a young boy named Akuna was out hunting. He had his catapult and cutlass in hand, looking for small animals, when he heard the sound of crying and laughter coming from a distance. He paused, listening closely. Yes, someone was definitely crying, and it sounded like a little child. Dropping his cutlass, Akuna sprinted towards the sound as fast as his legs could carry him. When he reached the scene, he saw the village children surrounding a small girl, hitting her without pity. Without thinking, Akuna threw himself into the middle of the group, fighting them off with all his strength. He was strong, much stronger than the other children, and it didn't take long before they ran away in fear. Breathing heavily, Akuna knelt down beside the girl, his heart aching for her. She was trembling, her face wet with tears. "Ndo," he said gently, meaning sorry. "Stop crying. Where is your brother?" Through her sobs, Akwanwa shook her head. "I don't have any brother or siblings," she whispered. "It's okay," Akuna said, his voice soft and comforting. "My name is Akuna, and I don't have any sibling either. It's just me and my mother. But don't worry, I won't let anyone hurt you again. I will protect you. If anyone bothers you, just tell them you will report them to your brother, me, and I will deal with them." His face was serious, and Akwanwa could see that he meant every word. Akwanwa wiped her tears and managed a small smile. "Thank you," she said softly. "What is your name?" Akuna asked her. "My name is Akwanwa," she replied. "Akwanwa," Akuna repeated, nodding. "It suits you. You are as beautiful as your name." Akwanwa smiled again, this time a little brighter. "Can you come with me to the bush?" Akuna asked gently. "I need to pick up my cutlass where I left it, and then I will walk you home." Akwanwa nodded eagerly. She loved adventures, and the idea of walking through the bush with Akuna excited her. Together, they made their way carefully through the forest, Akuna holding her hand to make sure she didn't trip or get hurt by the sharp branches or thorns along the way. He found his cutlass quickly, and as they walked back to the village, Akuna told Akwanwa stories about his hunting trips. "I want to be a hunter when I grow up," he said proudly. Akwanwa's eyes lit up. "Can I come with you one day when you go hunting?" she asked excitedly. Akuna chuckled and shook his head. "No, I don't want you to get hurt. The forest can be dangerous. There are sharp leaves, thorns, and all kinds of things that could hurt your beautiful skin." "But I can cover my body," Akwanwa insisted. "I want to go with you." Akuna kept refusing, smiling at her persistence, while Akwanwa kept pleading. They laughed and talked all the way until they reached her hut. Adane and Aduli had just returned from the farm, tired but eager to see their daughter Akwanwa. However, when they didn't find her at home, Worry quickly spread across their faces. Adani began to panic, her heart racing with fear. Let it not be what I'm thinking, she whispered to herself, her mind filled with all sorts of frightening thoughts. She rushed around the house, searching every corner, calling out for Aquam, but there was no sign of her. She checked the surrounding areas, looking behind every tree and bush, but Aquam was nowhere to be found. Where could she have gone? Adani's panic grew, and Aduli, though quieter, was equally concerned. They had warned her not to leave the house, but now she was missing, and fear crept into their hearts. Just then, a figure appeared at the entrance of their compound. It was Akuna, and to their great relief, he was holding Aquam by the hand. "Hey, Aquam," Adani cried out in a mixture of joy and worry. She rushed to her daughter, pulling her into a tight embrace, her hands quickly checking Aquam for any signs of injury. That's when she noticed the marks on Aquam's skin, red and swollen from the beating. Her eyes immediately darted to Akuna, filled with suspicion. "What happened to her?" she asked, her voice shaking with a mix of anger and concern. She feared the worst. Before Akuna could respond, Aquam softly spoke. "Nne, he saved me. The village children beat me up while I was watching them play, but Akuna came and fought them off for me." Adani's expression softened immediately, her anger melting away as she looked at Akuna with gratitude. "Nnam," she said, her voice full of appreciation. "Thank you so much. This girl doesn't listen. We warned her not to go out and play with the village children, but she disobeyed us. You see, she has no sibling to protect her, which is why we've been so careful. It's not that we want to stop her from having fun, but we don't just want her to get hurt. But thank you. Truly, we are very grateful." From where he sat, Aduli added, "Nna, Dalu." His voice was calm but filled with deep gratitude for what Akuna had done. Akuna smiled warmly, feeling proud that he had been able to help. "Nne, don't worry," he said confidently. "I have already told her that from today, I will be her brother. I will protect her from those village children. In fact, Nne, you see those children? I'm not done with them. I will still beat them up anytime I see them. They are afraid of me, and when I meet them at the stream, I will dip their heads into the river and make sure they drink every drop of water in that river for daring to touch my sister." He puffed out his chest, boasting with playful bravado. At that, Adani and Adule couldn't help but laugh. Their laughter was so deep and hearty that tears rolled down their faces. "Nnam, please," Adana said, wiping her tears. "Don't do that. Leave them. You've already beaten them enough. Thank you for being Aquama's brother. We are so lucky to have you. Just help us tell her to start listening to her parents from now on. I'm sure she has learned her lessons today." Akuna grinned and nodded. "Nne, don't worry. No one will ever touch her again in this village, I promise you." Adule, who had been listening intently, stood up and came closer, looking at the boy with curiosity. "Whose child are you?" he asked. "I am Nkonye's son," Akuna replied. Adani and Adule exchanged a glance. "Wait," Adule said. "Nkonye, the late Nkonye, Obuagu." "Yes, sir," Akuna answered, standing a little taller. "Chai! Umuike has lost a great man," Aduli exclaimed. "Your father was a brave hunter. He died fighting a lion all by himself in the forest. He killed the lion, but by the time he returned to the village, he had lost so much blood. It was a great loss for us. Akuna nodded. He had heard this story many times before. The villagers often spoke of his father's bravery, and each time it filled him with pride. He wanted to grow up, to be just like his father, a fearless hunter who protected the village. "My son," Adani said, her voice tender, "you won't die early like your father. I'm so happy that Nkoye has a brave son like you. Thank you so much for being Akwanwa's brother." They offered to have Akuna stay for dinner, but he politely refused. He needed to fetch water for his mother, and he promised to visit again soon. As he turned to leave, Adani and Aduli called out, "Please, extend our greetings to your mother." Akuna nodded, "I will." Before he left, he turned to Akwanwa, who had been quietly watching the entire exchange. "Akwa, don't worry," he said with a smile. "I will always come and visit you." Akwanwa smiled back, her heart feeling lighter than it had in days, and she waved as Akuna disappeared down the path, his figure growing smaller until he was out of sight. From that day on, a beautiful and unbreakable friendship blossomed between Akwanwa and Akuna. It was like the gods had brought them together, and they became inseparable. Akuna took on the role of the big brother Akwanwa never had, protecting her and making sure she was safe, just as he had promised. Akuna was not only stronger than most boys his age, but he was also fearless. Anytime the village children even thought about troubling Akwanwa, they quickly remembered that Akuna was always nearby, ready to defend her. They had learnt not to mess with Akwanwa. With Akuna by her side, Aduli and Adani no longer worried about letting Akwanwa go out into the village. They trusted Akuna completely, knowing he would never let anything happen to their daughter. Akuna also had a wonderful sense of humor. He loved making Akwanwa laugh with his silly jokes and wild stories. Sometimes, Akwanwa would tease him saying, "You lie so much. Where did you even get this story from?" They would both burst into laughter, their giggles echoing through the village, bringing smiles to everyone who heard them. As they grew, they were both seen everywhere. Akuna treated Akwanwa like treasure. She was too beautiful, and he wouldn't want her to hurt her delicate skin. He helped her out with her chores. They would both fetch water together, and Akuna would carry the bigger pot, while he would give Akwanwa a smaller one to carry. If they both went to the bush to fetch firewood, Akuna would insist on carrying the wood himself, not wanting Akwanwa to go through any form of stress. "You were not born for this kind of life," he would say to her. "You were born to be a queen, and a very rich man is going to marry you." Akwanwa would laugh at this, shaking her head as they walked home together. "I don't want to be a queen," she would say playfully. But they both knew that Akuna was only joking, even though deep down he believed she was destined for something special. Their bond became so strong that everyone in the village admired it. The elders, the children, and even their parents couldn't help but smile whenever they saw Akuna and Akwanwa together. They were like siblings, always looking out for each other and sharing everything. If anyone wanted to find Akwanwa, all they had to do was go to Akuna's house. And if anyone was looking for Akuna, they would definitely find him at Akwanwa's place. Their friendship even brought their families closer. Aduli and Adani began to see Akuna as their own son, while Akuna's mother saw Akwanwa as part of their family too. Akuna often helped Akwanwa's parents with a difficult task around the house. He would chop firewood, fetch water, and carry heavy loads, always eager to lend a hand. "This boy is a very good son," Aduli would say proudly. watching Akuna with admiration. He treated Akuna like his own child, and in return, Akuna loved him like a father. Their bond was built on trust, respect, and deep care for each other, and it only grew stronger as time went on. Years passed quickly, and Akwanwa grew into a stunningly beautiful maiden. Her beauty was so extraordinary that it became the talk of the entire village. No man could walk past her without turning his head for another look, as if her beauty was too captivating to be seen just once. Umuike Amaka, the villagers would exclaim, meaning this girl is so beautiful. Her features were striking. Her glowing skin, sparkling eyes, and graceful walk made her stand out wherever she went. The story of her beauty spread far and wide, and soon people from other depths of the village began visiting her family's house just to catch a glimpse of her. Her beauty was like a rare flower that everyone wanted to admire. It was said that no maiden in the village could compare to her. While Akwanwa was admired for her beauty, Akuna had also grown into a fine young man. He had become a strong and handsome hunter, known for his bravery and skill in the forest. When he wasn't out hunting, Akuna could be found working on the farm of a wealthy man, Ichi Ozo. His hard work paid off, as he earned enough to take care of himself and his mother. Not only that, but Akuna often shared what he earned with Aduli and his family, showing the same generosity and care he had shown to Akwanwa since they were children. Even as they both grew into adults, the bond between Akwanwa and Akuna remained as strong as ever. They still spent time together, walking through the village just like old times, laughing and sharing stories. Their friendship had only deepened over the years, and Akuna still admired Akwanwa with the same affection he had as a boy. He often teased her playfully, always praising her beauty in a way that made her feel like a queen. Now that all the men in the village are looking at you, he would say with a grin, "Make sure you choose wisely. Wash your eyes well and pick a very wealthy man. Don't marry a poor man, no. This your beauty needs maintenance, and only money can keep you shining like this." Aquama would burst into laughter, shaking her head at Akuna's teasing. "Don't worry," she would reply, her eyes twinkling with humor. "I won't disappoint you. I will choose the richest bachelor in the village, just as you've advised." The two of them would laugh together, their voices filling the air as they continued their journey side by side, as they always had been. As time went on, men from all over the village began flocking into Aduli's compound, eager to ask for Akwanwa's hand in marriage. The news of her beauty had spread far beyond their village, and suitors lined up, each hoping to win her heart. Some came with gifts, others with promises of wealth, but all of them were captivated by Akwanwa's beauty and grace. Among the men seeking her hand was Ikemefuna, a wealthy and influential man from the village. Ikemefuna was a man who had everything: wealth, power, and influence. And he never failed to remind anyone who cared to listen. He was one of the richest men in Umuike, owning vast acres of farmlands that stretched far beyond what the eye could see. His herd of cattle were countless, roaming freely over the land he ruled, and he had so many servants that no one in the village could keep track of all of them. These servants worked tirelessly on his farmlands, tending to his crops and livestock from sunrise to sunset. Ikemefuna was also a man of striking appearance, tall and handsome, and everywhere he went, people feared him as much as they respected him. Even the king, the highest authority in the village, treated Ikemefuna with caution, knowing that his influence could not be ignored. Whenever important people in Umuike were mentioned, Ikemefuna's name was always at the top of the list. But despite his wealth and good looks, Ikemefuna was not a kind man. In fact, he was known for his arrogance and cruelty. His servants trembled whenever he was around, their hands shaking as they walked under his watchful eye. Though they labored day and night, they were never rewarded with enough food to eat. Their stomachs often growled with hunger, but Ikemefuna didn't care. In fact, he seemed to enjoy their suffering. He would gather his servants around him when it was time for him to eat, ordering them to stand and watch as he devoured a big plate of food and large chunks of meat. As the hungry servants stood there, their mouths watering and their eyes filled with sadness, Ikemefuna would boast loudly about his riches. He would tear into a huge piece of meat, washing it down with a gourd of palm wine, all while his servants could only stand by helplessly, swallowing the spittle that gathered in their mouths. Ikemefuna, I have made money, he would shout proudly. Who in this village can be compared to me? I own more lands than anyone. My farmlands across the entire kingdom, and the yams in my barn can feed the entire village for 100 years. His voice would echo through the air as he praised himself. Odogu, rich man, he would hail himself. Eat, your chi has blessed you with so much wealth. The servants watching in silence often had tears in their eyes, their hearts heavy with the pain of their own hunger. But Ikemefuna never noticed, and if he did, he didn't care. To him, their suffering only made him feel more powerful. He believed that his wealth placed him above anyone else, and he enjoyed lording over them. When Ikemefuna heard the villagers talking about Aquam, the maiden whose beauty was known throughout the village, as soon as he heard of her, a thought entered his mind. A beauty like hers belonged with a wealthy man like Ikemefuna, he said to himself, smiling at the idea. He imagined walking through the village with Aquam by his side, her beauty catching everyone's eye. When they see us together, he thought, people will break their necks trying to stare at us. The respect I already have in this village will grow even more. The idea of having Aquam as his wife filled Ikemefuna with excitement, not because he cared for her, but because he wanted to show her off as a prize, a symbol of his wealth and power. Determined to make Aquam his, Ikemefuna decided that he would do whatever it took to win her heart. No matter what it costs me, he said to himself, I will make sure that Aquam becomes mine. In his mind, there was no doubt that his wealth and status would be enough to win her over, and he was prepared to use every resource he had to make sure of it. Unlike the other suitors who had come to Aduli's house with simple gifts like a keg of palm wine, Ikemefuna made a grand entrance. He didn't come alone or just with a few gifts. He arrived with 20 of his servants, each carrying something extravagant. The sight was breathtaking. One servant carried expensive clothes made from the finest fabrics, another boxes filled with glittery jewelry. There were others bearing yams, baskets of fruits, goats, and all kinds of things you could imagine. It was like a small market, moving towards Aduli's compound. And there, at the front of the procession sat Ikemefuna, perched proudly on his horse, his head held high with an air of superiority. He looked like a king, surveying his kingdom as he led his servants forward. As soon as Aduli and his wife saw him approach, their eyes widened in disbelief. The sheer number of gifts took their breath away. They couldn't stop shouting with joy. "Hey! The gods have visited us today," Aduli's wife cried, her hands raised in gratitude. "What have we done to deserve such honor?" Aduli was no different. He beamed with happiness, unable to believe that such a powerful and wealthy man as Ikemefuna had come to visit them. They had never seen so many riches in their lives, and their hearts overflowed with joy. To have a man like Ikemefuna, someone respected by the entire village, even by the king, standing in their compound was something they had never imagined. When the initial excitement had calmed down, they all sat under the big tree in the compound to talk. Aduli and his wife were still giddy with joy, eager to hear why Ikemefuna had come. "I have come to ask for your daughter's hand in marriage," Ikemefuna announced, his voice strong and full of confidence. "I have heard of her beauty, and now that I've seen her with my own eyes, I know that she is the one I want as my wife. You see, if you give me your daughter, I will make sure poverty never touches your family again. I am Odogu. Everyone knows this. What you see today is nothing. I heard your family has only one piece of land. I will give you more lands than you can ever farm. I will fill your barns with yams that will last for generations." He spoke with such arrogance, as if his wealth could solve every problem in the world. Aduli and his wife were overjoyed, almost unable to contain their excitement. This was more than they had ever hoped for. The great Ikemefuna, the wealthiest man in the village, wanted to marry their daughter. It felt like a dream come true. "Ha, Ikemefuna! We have become in-laws," Aduli exclaimed, laughing with delight. "Who in their right mind would reject a man as great as you? My daughter Aquam is already your wife. Just give us a date for the traditional marriage, and we will start planning immediately." Ikemefuna smiled proudly, clearly pleased with himself. "Aduli, you are a wise man. You have made the best decision. Now, I want you to tell all these flies, cockroaches, rats, and lizards who come here asking for a hand in marriage. Tell them that Ikemefuna has claimed her. She is now mine," he boasted, puffing out his chest as he spoke. They all laughed together, sharing in the happiness of the moment. They passed around palm wine, drinking and celebrating as if the marriage had already been sealed. After a while, Ikemefuna asked to see Aquam, and when she stepped out of the house, his eyes lit up with admiration. He couldn't stop praising her beauty. "Look at Ikemefuna's wife," he shouted, his voice full of pride. "The morning sun has nothing on her. She is the most beautiful maiden in the land. See how everything is perfect and in the right proportion. By the time I spoil you with my money, no one in Umuike will be able to recognize you again." His eyes gleamed as he spoke, imagining a future where he would parade Aquam around like a prized possession. Aquam stood there, smiling politely, but inside she felt uneasy about his boastful words. However, she remained calm, out of respect for her parents, who were also happy with the prospect of this marriage. Ikemefuna wasn't finished. "Look at what I brought for you," he said, motioning to the expensive clothes his servant was carrying. "I don't want to see you wearing these rags anymore. If you need more clothes, just tell me. I will send a truckload. I want the entire village to see my wealth on your body. When you walk, they should smell my money from miles away." Aquam nodded and smiled again. "Thank you so much," she said softly. May the gods bless you. Ikemefuna laughed loudly, waving his hands dismissively. Don't worry about the gods, he said with a grin. They have blessed me already. If they bless me anymore, I will dethrone our king and buy the entire kingdom. Is that what you want? Everyone laughed at his joke. Aquam quietly helped the servants carry the gifts inside, while her parents continued talking excitedly with Ikemefuna. It was a day of great joy for them, a day they would remember for a long time. For Aduli and his family, the visits felt like the beginning of a new life filled with wealth and prosperity. After Ikemefuna left, Aquam felt a mix of emotions swelling in her heart. She couldn't shake off the feeling that something wasn't right. So she gathered her courage and approached her father. Papa, she began gently. Why did you and Mama accept Ikemefuna's proposal without asking me first? Shouldn't my opinion matter? You were supposed to ask me if I like him before making such a big decision on my behalf. Aduli looked at his daughter with a warm but firm smile, shaking his head as if to dismiss her concerns. No, my daughter. You don't say no to a man like Ikemefuna. His voice was filled with excitement. Don't you know who he is? Ikemefuna is one of the wealthiest men in this village. Just look at all the things he brought today. Clothes, jewelry, food, meat. Can we ever gather this much from our little farm, even in 2 years? The gods have smiled on us, Aquam. They have remembered our family's suffering. There is no need to worry about anything. This man will take care of you, and with him, your beauty will become the talk of not just our village, but the entire kingdom. Everyone will envy you. Aduli's eyes sparkled with pride as he spoke. I have been insulted and looked down upon in this village because we are poor. But once the villagers hear who my in-law is, no one will dare talk down on me again. Trust me, Aquam, I know what is good for you. This is a blessing, a dream come true for all of us. As Aquam listened to her father's words, her initial frustration began to fade. She could see how happy and proud he was, and her heart softened. The thought of marrying a wealthy man like Ikemefuna started to feel exciting. She imagined the respect and admiration she would receive as his wife. Akuna, her beloved brother, would be so proud of her, and her parents would no longer have to suffer poverty. Smiling to herself, Aquam decided to go share the good news with Akuna. She went into her hut, carefully selecting a few gifts to take with her. She placed a piece of fine clothes, some beautiful beads and food items into a basket, eager to show Akuna what Ikemefuna had brought. She knew her brother would be so happy for her. When Aquam arrived at Akuna's house, she found him just returning from the farm. His clothes were dusty, and he looked tired. But as soon as he saw Aquam's excited face, he couldn't help but smile. Ako, Ako, she called out, her voice full of joy. Guess what? Akuna chuckled, wiping the sweat from his brow. You know I'm terrible at guessing, Aquam. And besides, I'm just so tired. Tell me what's making you happy. Aquam giggled and handed him the basket. Take a look at this, she said, her eyes sparkling with excitement. Akuna peered into the basket and gasped. Wow, these are beautiful and expensive, he exclaimed. Aquam, where did you get all this? Aquam smiled proudly. Okay, since you want to know, I will tell you. I'm getting married. And not just to anyone. He's wealthy, Akuna. You should have seen the way he arrived at our house today. He came with lots of servants and gifts that could last us 2 whole years. Akuna's eyes lit up with surprise and joy. He jumped up from his seat, clapping his hands. Hey, you don't mean it. Akwanwa, you are getting married. This is wonderful news. You deserve it, my sister, he said, sweeping her into a warm embrace. I'm so happy that he's wealthy. Now, I'm sure he'll take good care of this beauty for me, just like I've always done. Hope you told him about me. He shouldn't dare mistreat you, or else I will come after him. Tell him about me. Aquam laughed, shaking her head. Akuna, it hasn't come to that. He will treat me well, don't worry. Nobody is going to beat anyone, she said playfully. They both laughed, their voices full of joy. Akuna sat back down, still smiling. Honestly, I'm so happy for you, Akwanwa. These gifts are beautiful and you deserve all the happiness. Thank you, Akwanwa said, her heart full of warmth. After a moment, Akuna's curiosity gets the better of him. So, tell me, who is this man? Is he from our village? Aquam nodded, her excitement returning. Yes, his name is Ikemefuna. Akuna's expression suddenly changed. His smile faded, and he stood up, handing the baskets back to her. Wait, Ikemefuna, the wealthy Ikemefuna. Yes, Aquam replied, her eyes still bright with happiness. But Akuna's next words left her shocked. Take these items, Aquam. I don't want them. I don't want anything that comes from that lunatic, Akuna said, his voice suddenly harsh and cold. Aquam stared at him in confusion. Why, Akuna? You've always wanted me to marry a rich man, and now that I've found one, you are rejecting my gifts. Why? I said I don't want them, Akuna repeated, his face serious. I don't like that man. He is full of himself and has no respect for anyone. Don't you hear how he treats his servants? He doesn't treat people well. That is not the kind of man I want for you. Tears filled Aquama's eyes. Her joy quickly turned into sadness. But my parents have already said yes to him, Akuna. I'm going to marry him. Why are you trying to ruin this happy moment? I give you this gift from my heart, from the depths of my heart, and you are rejecting it. You are hurting me, Akuna. Aquama, it's not like that, Akuna began, trying to explain, but it was too late. Aquama, her heart heavy with disappointment, picked up the basket, her tears falling freely now. Without another word, she turned and walked out of the compound as fast as her legs could carry her. Akuna stood there, calling after her as he watched her leave, his heart filled with regret. He didn't want to see his sister hurt, but deep inside, he couldn't shake the feeling that Ikemefuna wasn't the right man for her. Akuna sat back down, deep in thoughts, his mind swelling with the argument he had just had with Aquama. He felt torn between protecting her and the fear that he had hurt her feelings. As he sat there lost in his thoughts, his mother Wanyoma stepped out of the house, her gentle presence pulling him back to the moment. Nne, Akuna greeted, surprised to see her. I didn't know you were awake. Yes, my son, Wanyoma replied, her voice calm and warm. I've been awake for a while. I heard your conversation with Aquama. She paused for a moment then added, you shouldn't have rejected her gifts, my child. Akuna sighed, frustration bubbling inside him. But Mama, I don't like Ikemefuna for her. He is not a good man. I can't sit back and let her marry someone like him. Wanyoma smiled softly, shaking her head as she sat beside her son. You can't dissuade a woman in love, my son. Even if you don't like him, it's her choice to make. Mama, I don't think Aquama is in love with him. You can't say that, Akuna countered, his voice rising with frustration. When did he even come into her life? How could she be in love with him so soon? His face was flushed with anger. the thoughts of Ikemefuna clouding his mind. Wayama placed a gentle hand on Akuna's shoulder. Listen to me, my son. I know you care about Akwanwa. She is like a sister to you, and I know you want the best for her. But by rejecting her gifts, you are pushing her away. She might start hiding things from you, and you know how close the two of you have always been. You wouldn't want to lose that bond, would you? Wayama paused, her eyes softening as she looked at her son. I love seeing you and Akwanwa together. You two have always been so close, like siblings. Honestly, I've always wished it was you marrying her. Mama, how can you say such a thing? Akuna exclaimed, shocked by her words. Akwanwa is my sister, you know that. I can't marry my sister. Wayama chuckled softly. Alright. But promise me one thing, my son. Go and make things right with her. Accept her gifts. She meant well, and she values your opinion more than you know. Akuna nodded, realizing his mother was right. He didn't want to lose the closeness he shared with Akwanwa. After eating and freshening up, he decided to go to her house and apologize. He hoped it wasn't too late to mend things. When Akuna arrived at Akwanwa's house, he saw her mother Adani sitting in front of the hut picking beans. He greeted her respectfully, bowing slightly. Nne, good evening. How are you doing? I'm fine, my son, Adani replied with a smile. How is your mother? She is well, Nne. She sends her greetings. Thank you. Please give her my greetings too, Adana said, continuing to pick her beans. Are you here to see Akwanwa? Yes, Nne. Where is she? Akuna asked, trying to sound casual. Adane shook her head gently. She's been at the backyard since she came back from your place. She's been sad all day, she said, her voice soft with concern. Akuna's heart sank a little. He hadn't realized how much he had hurt Akwanwa. Thank you, Nne. I will go talk to her, he said. Adani smiled knowingly. This is up to you two. You both know how to settle your quarrels. Akuna chuckled, feeling a bit more at ease, as he made his way to the backyard. When he saw Akwanwa sitting alone, her face sad and distant, his heart ached. She was the beauty of Umuike, always so full of life, but now she looked so lost in her sadness. Akwanwa, he called softly as he approached. I'm so sorry. Please forgive me. He sat beside her, his voice full of sincerity. I have come to collect my gift, he added with a small smile. Akwanwa didn't even look at him. Leave me alone, Akuna, she said bluntly. I've already given the gifts to someone else. Akuna wasn't deterred. He knew Akwanwa better than anyone. That's not true, Akwanwa, he said playfully. Even if you've given them away, then go inside and get me new ones, he teased, hoping to lighten her mood. Akwanwa finally looked at him, her eyes still full of hurt. You rejected my gifts, Akuna. You made me feel so sad. Seeing the pain in her eyes, Akuna knew he had to make things right. My beauty, he said with a grin. You look like a lizard when you are angry. Can you see your face? He teased, scrunching up his own face in a funny way. Akwanwa tried to keep her serious expression, but she couldn't help it. She burst into laughter, playfully hitting him on the arm. Stop it, Akuna, she said between giggles. And just like that, the tension between them melted away. They laughed together as they always did, their friendship too strong to be broken by a simple argument. No matter what, Akuna and Akwanwa could never stay angry at each other for long. Their bond was like the wind, free, flowing and always finding its way back. Ikemefuna was bursting with pride. Everything had gone even smoother than he had imagined. Not only was he the wealthiest man in the village, but now he had the finest maiden in Umuike as his future wife. I'm so lucky, he laughed to himself, his heart swelling with self-satisfaction. I have all the riches anyone could desire, and now I will have the most beautiful woman in the village by my side." True to his word, Ikemefuna showered Aduli and his family with gifts and wealth. Overnight, Aduli's life changed. He gave Aduli vast lands, enough to farm and raise livestock for generations. He helped Aduli secure a prestigious chieftaincy title, a symbol of power and respect in the village. He even built Aduli a new larger hut, a far cry from the small humble one they had always lived in. The transformation was so incredible that Aduli and his family could hardly believe their good fortune. They had lived in poverty for so long, but now they were respected and admired. No one looked down on them anymore. In fact, once the rumors had spread that Ikemefuna was betrothed to Aquam, the villagers' respect for Aduli's family grew even more. They were now seen as a family of wealth and influence. Despite all the happiness Ikemefuna brought to Aduli and his family, Akuna still couldn't bring himself to accept him. Something deep inside Akuna felt uneasy about the man. But seeing the joy Ikemefuna brought to Aquam and her family, he decided to keep his concerns to himself, not wanting to spoil their happiness. He didn't want Aquam to think he was against her marriage, so he quietly played along, even though his heart wasn't in it. His friendship with Aquam remained strong, and he promised himself that he would always be there for her no matter what. One evening, Aduli called Aquam aside and asked her to deliver a fresh keg of palm wine to Ikemefuna's hut. Aduli knew how much Ikemefuna loved freshly tapped palm wine and thought this would be a good opportunity for Aquam and Ikemefuna to spend some time together. Aquam agreed, carrying the keg with her as she made her way to Ikemefuna's compound. But when Aquam arrived, she was greeted by a sight that filled her with shock and sorrow. In the middle of Ikemefuna's compound were several elderly men kneeling on the ground, trembling with fear. Before them stood Ikemefuna, holding a long, thick cane in his hand, beating them mercilessly. The cries of the old men and women filled the air as they pleaded for mercy, their voices weak and filled with pain. Aquam's heart ached as she watched the scene unfold before her. Without thinking, Aquam rushed forward, her eyes wide with disbelief. She ran towards Ikemefuna, her voice trembling as she tried to intervene. "Obim," she pleaded, using the affectionate term she had begun calling him. "Please stop. These men and women are old enough to be your parents. Show them mercy, I beg you." Ikemefuna paused for a moment, looking at her with cold eyes. "Pity who?" he scoffed, pushing her aside as if she were nothing. "And point of correction, you said they are old enough to be my parents, but they are not my parents. Do you know what they have done? For weeks now, they have been weeding just 1 acre of land. 1 acre, and yet they eat like elephants. 1 bag of rice doesn't even last 10 seconds with them. Bring it now and watch them tear it down. They are so lazy and useless." His voice was filled with rage as he continued to whip the elderly workers, ignoring their cries of pain. "Fools! Idiots!" he shouted, his voice twisted with anger as he whipped them. Aquam tried again, her voice filled with desperation. "Obim, please. They are trying their best. Please stop." But Ikemefuna's heart was unmoved. "If you like, cry blood," he said to her. "I will make sure I punish them to my satisfaction." No matter how much Aquam begged, he refused to listen. The sounds of the cane striking their flesh echoed in the air, and Aquam could no longer bear to watch. Tears welled up in her eyes as she realized that nothing she said would stop him. Silently, she placed the keg of palm wine on the ground, and without another word, turned and walked away, her heart heavy with sorrow. As she made her way down the dusty paths back to her home, Aquam's mind raced with thoughts. The image of the elderly men and women being beaten played over and over in her mind. How could Ikemefuna be so cruel? The man who had seemed so charming and powerful now looked like a heartless tyrant in her eyes. Her chest tightened with worry, and tears streamed down her face as she walked. Akuna had been right all along. Ikemefuna wasn't the kind of man she had thought he was. He wasn't the gentle, caring man she had hoped to marry. He was harsh, unforgiving, and full of pride. As Aquam walked through the quiet village, the weight of her worries pressed down on her. How could she marry a man like Ikemefuna? The joy she had once felt about her engagement was slowly turning into fear and doubt. Aduli was in the kitchen, stirring a pot of soup, when Aquam walked in. The moment she saw her daughter's face, she knew something was wrong. Aquam's usual brightness was gone, replaced by a deep sadness. It was hard to miss. Aquam, Aduli called gently, wiping her hands on her wrapper. "Why do you look so sad, my child? What has happened?" Aquam sighed heavily, her heart heavy with frustration and pain. "Nne, it's Ikemefuna," she said, her voice trembling with emotion. "That man is so evil, so cruel. He has no heart, Mama. I went to his house today and I saw him flogging elderly men. These weren't young men, Mama. These were old men, old enough to be his father. They were crying and begging for mercy, but he wouldn't listen. He kept beating them like they were animals. Mama, I'm so worried. What kind of man is this? I'm scared. Ikemefuna is wicked." Aduli listened closely, hearing the pain in her daughter's voice. She could see the fear and confusion in Aquam's eyes, but she felt helpless. "Aquam," she said softly, trying to comfort her. "Ikemefuna is a strong and wealthy man. I'm sure those men you saw are his slaves. You mustn't concern yourself too much with what he does to them. The important thing is that he loves you. Ikemefuna loves you, my daughter, and he will always treat you well." "But Mama," Aquam protested, her eyes wide with disbelief. "You know, I just can't stand by and watch him treat people like that, especially the elderly. You didn't raise me to be this heartless." Aduli sighed deeply, her face filled with worry. "I know, my daughter. You have a kind heart, and I love that about you. But Ikemefuna has done so much for our family. He has removed shame from us, has given us wealth and respect. We've come so far that it's too late to turn back now. You must learn to handle him gently. He's an odogu, a strong man with power. In time, you will understand each other better." Aquam looked at her mother, seeing the helplessness in her eyes. She knew her mother didn't have the answers she was looking for, and it made her heart ache even more. Forcing a smile, she nodded. "It's okay, Nne," she said softly, even though inside nothing felt okay. She walked out of the kitchen and into the hut, her mind still troubled by what she had witnessed. The next day, Aquam was in the kitchen again preparing a meal when she heard a familiar voice calling out from outside. It was Akuna. "Aquam," he called excitedly, his voice full of energy. "Look what I brought for you." Aquam dropped what she was doing and rushed out of the kitchen, a smile already forming on her face. She hadn't seen Akuna the previous day, and it felt like ages since they last spoke. "Akuna," she exclaimed, her eyes lighting up with happiness. "Why didn't you come yesterday like you promised?" Akuna grinned, holding up a small bundle wrapped in leaves. "I'm so sorry, Aquam," he said, his voice apologetic. "I worked all day at Ichie Ozo's farm, and by the time I lay back to rest and woke up, it was already midnight. I didn't even realize how tired I was. After that, I went hunting." "You worked too hard, Akuna," Aquam said softly, her voice filled with concern. "But don't worry, the gods will bless you for your hard work." "Thank you, Aquam," Akuna replied, smiling as he handed her the bundle. "Here, take this, it's bushmeat." Akwanwa's face lit up with excitement as she unwrapped the leaves to find a freshly caught squirrel. "Hey, Akuna, you always take such good care of me," she said, her voice full of joy. "You know how much I love squirrel meat." "I know," Akuna said with a proud smile, happy to see her so pleased with his gift. Just then, Aduli and Adane entered the compound, hearing their daughter's laughter. "Why is our sunshine so happy today?" Aduli asked with a smile. "Father," Aquam said excitedly, "look, Akuna brought me a squirrel meat, my favorite." Aduli beamed with joy. "Akuna," he said, clapping his hands together, "thank you for always making your sister happy. The gods will bless you richly for your kindness." Adane nodded in agreement. "Yes, may the gods bless you, Akuna," she added, her voice filled with gratitude. But before they could continue their conversation, Ikemefuna walked into the compound, followed by several of his servants, carrying a very large bushmeat. Everyone quickly greeted him with respect, bowing slightly in his presence. "What's going on here?" Ikemefuna asked, looking around with a curious expression. "Akwanwa, why are you so happy?" "Look," Akwanwa said proudly, holding up the small squirrel meat. "Akuna brought me this squirrel. Isn't it nice?" Ikemefuna peered at the meat wrapped in leaves, his face twisting in disgust. "What is this nonsense?" he said sharply. "How can my wife eat this stupid meat? Squirrel meat. Is this what Ikemefuna's wife deserves?" He motioned to his servant to bring forward the large antelope they were carrying. "Look here, Akwanwa," he said, his voice booming with pride. "I brought you an antelope. That is the kind of meat worthy of Ikemefuna's wife, not this rubbish. Throw that thing away and take this." Aduli and Adane immediately chimed in, their voices full of gratitude. "Thank you so much, our in-law," they said in unison. "This is a huge gift. We are so grateful for your generosity." Aduli turned to Akuna and said, "Take this antelope to the kitchen, and both of you should prepare it." Akuna nodded silently, taking the large antelope to the kitchen, but his heart was heavy. He felt a deep sadness wash over him. How dare Ikemefuna insult his gifts to Akwanwa like that? He had spent the entire night in the forest, hunting without success, until finally he had caught the squirrel. It wasn't much, but it was from his heart, and Akwanwa had been so happy to receive it. Now, Ikemefuna had made him feel small, like his effort meant nothing. As he butchered the antelope, a wave of jealousy swept over Akuna. He couldn't stand the way Ikemefuna looked down on him and his gifts. In his heart, Akuna made a silent vow. He would go back to the bush, and this time he would catch a bigger animal than Ikemefuna's antelope. He would prove that his love for Akwanwa was greater than anything Ikemefuna could ever give her. As he heard Ikemefuna's laughter echoing through the compound, Akuna's anger grew, burning deep within him. Early the next morning, just as the sun was starting to rise, Akuna set out into the forest with his local gun in hand. His heart was filled with determination. He was going to hunt something big, something worthy of Akwanwa. The sting of the previous day still burned in his mind. The memory of Ikemefuna belittling his gifts pushed him forward. He roamed through the thick bushes, his eyes scanning every corner of the forest. But luck wasn't on his side. Hours passed, and still he found nothing. The sun climbed higher in the sky, and the heat became unbearable. Yet Akuna kept going, unwilling to give up. After what felt like forever, exhaustion finally caught up with him. Frustrated, Akuna slumped to the ground, his heart heavy with disappointment. He buried his face in his hands, thinking about the events of the day before. "Who does Ikemefuna think he is?" he muttered under his breath. No matter how hard he tried, he couldn't shake the humiliation of having his gifts to Akwanwa insulted. He wanted to prove himself, but the forest was silent, offering him nothing. Suddenly, A rustling sound came from the bushes nearby. It was loud, like a big animal moving through the underbush. Akuna's heart raced. Could this be his chance? Without thinking, he grabbed his gun, aimed in a direction, and fired a shot. The loud crack of the gun echoed through the forest, but instead of the thud of an animal falling, he heard something else, a scream. A wave of panic washed over him. "Oh my God," Akuna gasped, his mind spinning. "I'm finished. I'm finished," he screamed as he scrambled to his feet and rushed towards the source of the sound. His heart pounded in his chest as he pushed through the bushes, terrified of what he might find. When he reached the clearing, his worst fear came true. There, lying on the ground, was Aquam. She wasn't moving. Akuna let out a loud cry, his voice breaking with panic. "What have I done? Hey, please, Aquam, don't do this to me," he pleaded, dropping to his knees beside her. His hands shook as he reached out to her, his heart heavy with fear. But just as Akuna's panic reached its peak, Aquam opened her eyes and burst into laughter. She sat up looking at him with a teasing smile. "So you love me this much?" she asked, playfully, her laughter filling the air. Akuna was stunned, his panic quickly turning into relief. He rushed to embrace her, holding her tightly. "Why did you do this to me?" he asked, his voice still shaking. "You know I almost died of fear. I could have shot myself here, Aquam." Aquam smiled, patting his back gently. "I'm fine now, Akuna, but you almost shot me for real. What are you even doing in the forest at this time?" "I was hunting," Akuna replied quickly, his words tumbling out. "I came to hunt." Aquam stared at him knowingly, raising her eyebrow. "Hunting? For what?" Akuna shifted uncomfortably. "What?" he asked, trying to sound casual. "Why are you looking at me like that?" "It's because of Ikemefuna, isn't it?" Aquam asked softly, her eyes searching his face. No. Who is Ikemefuna?" "This isn't about him," Akuna stammered, but Aquam's knowing smile told him she wasn't fooled. "Akum," she said gently, using the affectionate name she had always called him. "Listen to me. I really appreciate your gift. And you don't have to go through all this trouble just to get me another bushmeat. Even with the big antelope Ikemefuna brought, I still enjoyed your squirrel more. It meant more to me because it came from you." Her voice was sweet, filled with care, and her words were like a balm to Akuna's wounded heart. Akuna's face broke into a broad smile. Hearing Aquam say that made all his frustration disappear. She always knew just how to make him feel better, how to remind him that their bond was special no matter who else was in the picture. For a moment, his heart was light again, and he realized that Aquam still valued him, even with Ikemefuna around. But his smile quickly faded as a new thought crossed his mind. "Why did you come to the forest alone?" he asked, his tone becoming serious. "I was looking for you," Aquam replied simply. "Mama said you hadn't returned from hunting, so I came to find you." Akuna sighed, shaking his head. "Aquam, how many times have I told you? The forest is not for you. Your skin is smooth like milk. I don't want anything to scratch it. This place is full of danger." Aquam laughed, brushing off his worry. Together, they stood up, and as they walked out of the forest, they chatted and laughed, as if the scare from earlier had never happened. Their bond, as always, felt strong and unbreakable. As they entered the village, people began to notice them. The villagers, as usual, couldn't stop staring and whispering amongst themselves. Some shook their heads in disapproval, while others muttered under their breath. "I've never seen anyone as foolish as this Akuna," one of the villagers sneered, clapping her hands together. "Look at him, fine for nothing. Always following someone's wife around like a little puppy. Fetching water, carrying firewood. Chai! Such a useless man. He's a big woman rapper, another agreed, shaking her head in disbelief. I wonder what he will do when she finally marries Ikemefuna. But Akuna didn't care. He ignored their whispers and the judgmental glances. As long as Aquam was by his side, none of it mattered. They continued walking, their laughter ringing through the village, unbothered by the gossip swirling around them. One early morning, Mayoma called her son Akuna to sit with her. Her face was clouded with worry as she spoke. Her voice was soft but full of concern. Akuna, my son, she began, her words careful and slow. There is something I've been thinking about and it's been bothering me for some time now. I don't like the way the villagers talk about you. They mock you, calling you names and laughing behind your back. And it's all because of Akwanwa. You know she's getting married soon. I think it's time for you to start distancing yourself from her. The villagers are watching. Before she could finish her sentence, Akuna quickly interrupted, shaking his head. No, Mama, you can't say that, he said firmly, his heart tightening at the thoughts. There is no way I can be separated from Akwanwa. She is like a sister to me. Let the villagers talk all they want. Let them call me names, it doesn't matter to me. But please, Mama, don't ever ask me to stay away from her again. His voice was steady, but there was a deep sadness behind it. Wanyoma sighed, her eyes full of love and worry, as she looked at her son. She took a deep breath, unsure of how to respond. I just hope you don't hurt yourself in the end, she finally said. Her voice was quiet but heavy. She knew how much Aquam meant to Akuna, but she also knew the weight of the villagers' words. Later that day, Aquam was sitting under a large tree, quietly making beats. She loved the calmness of the walk, letting her hands move as her mind wandered. Just as she was finishing a string of colorful beads, one of Ikemefuna's servants entered the compound. Greetings. My master sends for you, the servant said, his tone formal. Akwanwa looked up, her heart sinking a little. She didn't feel like seeing Ikemefuna. Lately, she had grown tired of his proud and rude behavior. He seemed to care more about himself than anything else, and it was wearing her down. But after thinking for a moment, she sighed and stood up, deciding to go. She knew it wouldn't be wise to refuse. When Aquam arrived at Ikemefuna's compound, she found him sitting with his best friend on a chair and drinking palm wine. As she greeted them both politely, Ikemefuna's eyes lit up with admiration. Akugom, he hailed her, his voice loud and full of pride. Just look at this work of art. You are so beautiful. Aquam forced a smile, though inside she didn't feel the happiness his words suggested. Izuna, Ikemefuna's friend, who had been silently sipping his wine, stared at her, with his eyes clearly taken by her beauty as well. Aquanwa, Ikemefuna said again, his voice filled with authority. I want you to prepare a special dish for me today. I want to see if your cooking is as beautiful as you are. Why not? Izuna chimed in, grinning. She is well trained. I'm sure the food will be perfect. Aquanwa nodded and excused herself, heading to the kitchen to prepare the meal. As she left, Izuna couldn't contain his excitement. Ikemefuna, you are such a lucky man, he said, shaking his head in admiration. Just look at her. She is stunning, like the morning sunshine. No one in this village has a wife as beautiful as Aquanwa. Ikemefuna's ego swelled with pride, and he began to boast. You see, the day I will marry Aquanwa, the entire village will know something grand has happened. They will know that Ikemefuna is marrying the most beautiful maiden in Umuike. I will invite everyone in this kingdom. I will slaughter over 100 cows, and the food will be more than enough for everyone. People will eat and take food home. My marriage will be greater than a New Yam festival. Nothing like it has ever been done in this land. Odogu, Izuna hailed him, raising his drink. The whole village will shake from the greatness of that day. Just then, Aquam returned carrying a tray of food. She set it down before them with a polite smile, stepping back as Ikemefuna prepared to eat. He washed his hands, rolled a ball of fufu and dipped it into the soup. But as soon as he took a bite, his face twisted in disgust. Without warning, he spat the food out onto the ground. Tufiakwa! Abomination, he shouted angrily. So you want to poison me? Aquam's heart jumped as she rushed forward in panic. Obim, what's wrong with the food? She asked, her voice trembling with fear. What's wrong with the food? Ikemefuna repeated, glaring at her. How many bags of salt did you pour into this soup? He asked. Aquam's face paled. I'm sorry, she whispered, her voice small. It was a mistake. I didn't mean to. Mistake? Ikemefuna sneered. You are very stupid for making such a mistake. So, if I marry you, you will waste all my money buying salt just to poison me, so that you and your family can take my wealth. Aquam's eyes filled with tears. No, please, she begged, her voice shaking. Your servants are here and your friend too. Let's talk about this in private later. Please. Will you shut up? Ikemefuna snapped, his voice full of anger. Are you better than any of my slaves? Is your family better than them? At least, my slaves work to eat. Your wretched father gets everything for free from me, and that's why you are misbehaving. Yet you can't even cook a simple meal. That was the final blow. Tears streamed down Aquam's face as the shame and hurt became too much to bear. Without another word, she turned and ran from the compound, her heart breaking with every step. She ran as fast as her legs could carry her, the sound of Ikemefuna's angry voice echoing in her ears, until she reached the safety of her home. As soon as Aquam left in tears, Izuna turned to Ikemefuna with a sly look. You know, he began, his tone serious. There is something I've been meaning to tell you for a while. You need to train your wife better. She's too spoiled. Ikemefuna's face shifted from pride to concern. Why do you say so? He asked, curious, but clearly worried. Didn't you see the way she ran away from you just now? Izuna pressed. That's rude, don't you think? And I think I know why. It's because of that good-for-nothing boy who is always following her around. What's that his name again? Akuna. I think there's something going on between them. Ikemefuna laughed dismissively, waving his hand as if the thoughts were ridiculous. Oh, is that what's bothering you? He said, trying to brush it off. That's just her brother Akuna. Everyone in the village knows they've been close since they were children. But you know they are not really siblings, Izuna insisted, his voice serious, and they are no longer children. You better pull them apart before something happens. You cannot stay in the water and allow soap to enter your eyes. Disentangle them before you lose Aquamwa. Ikemefuna's laughter faded. Ta, who is Akuna? He scoffed, trying to sound confident, though a flicker of doubt crossed his mind. That poverty-stricken hunter. What can he possibly do? I am Ikemefuna, the richest man in this village, he boasted loudly. But deep inside, a seed of fear was growing. He couldn't bear the thoughts of losing Aquamwa, and to a mere hunter. She was his now, and he wasn't going to let anyone, especially Akuna, come between them. He decided then and there that he would warn Aquamwa to stay away from Akuna. After all, he owned her now, didn't he? Meanwhile, back at Aquamwa's home, Akuna was sitting in front of the hut chatting happily with Adani as they picked vegetables together. They were laughing and enjoying the evening when Aquamwa walked in. And though she tried to wipe them away quickly, both Akuna and Adani noticed right away. Their laughter stopped and they looked at her with concern. What's wrong? They both asked in unison. worry evident in their voices. Akwanwa tried to force a smile, but it barely reached her eyes. "It's nothing," she lied. "I kicked my leg against a stone, and it hurt me badly. But I didn't injure myself." She wiped her tears again, hoping they wouldn't press her for more. Akuna stared at her, knowing she wasn't telling the truth. He could always tell when something was bothering Akwanwa, but he didn't want to push her. Instead, he played along, pretending to accept her answer. "All right," he said softly, though his heart told him something was more wrong. Akwanwa quietly sat down under a tree, lost in her thoughts. She watched as Akuna and Aduli continued picking vegetables, chatting about small things. Akuna, however, kept stealing glances at her, his mind racing with questions. He didn't like seeing her so upset. After a long silence, Akwanwa suddenly spoke up. "Akuna," she called out softly, "can't I cook?" Akuna looked up, surprised by her question. "Cook?" he repeated. "Did Ikemefuna say you can't cook?" Akwanwa shook her head. "No, I'm just asking," she said, though her voice was filled with doubt. Akuna smiled warmly, trying to reassure her. "Akwanwa, your food is the sweetest thing I've ever tasted," he said sincerely. "I could eat it every day and never get tired of it." His voice was kind and his words were meant to lift her spirits. He had a strong feeling that Ikemefuna had said something hurtful to her, but he didn't want to press her further. Akwanwa smiled for real this time, feeling a warmth in her heart. Akuna's words meant so much to her, and she felt a little lighter knowing he appreciated her. Inside though, she was growing more certain that she couldn't go through with marrying Ikemefuna. He had no respect for her and he didn't value her as a person. She was tired of him and his overbearing nature. She didn't want to be with someone who made her feel small. Akuna didn't know exactly what was going on in Akwanwa's mind, but he could tell something wasn't right. His protective instincts kicked in and he spoke up again. "If Ikemefuna makes you feel bad, just tell me," he said, his voice steady. "I will go and beat the hell out of him. I'm stronger than him, you know." Akwanwa couldn't help but laugh at his words. His playful threats brought a smile to her face, and for a moment the weight on her head lifted. Aduli, who had been listening quietly, chuckled softly. "You would do no such thing, son," she said with a teasing smile. The three of them laughed together, the lightness of the moment helping to wash away the tension that had filled the air. Though Akwanwa's heart was still heavy with the decision she knew she had to make. Being with Akuna and her mother reminded her that she wasn't alone. For now, that was enough to keep her going. The next morning, Akwanwa was in the kitchen helping her mother prepare breakfast. The gentle clanking of pots and the smell of food filled the air as they walked together in peaceful silence. Suddenly, the quiet air was interrupted by the arrival of one of Ikemefuna's servants. He entered the kitchen, his face lined with fear, and greeted them quickly. "Greetings. My master wants to see you immediately," he said to Akwanwa, his voice shaky as he delivered Ikemefuna's command. Akwanwa turned to the servant, her face darkening with anger. She had had enough of Ikemefuna's constant demands and insults. "Tell your master," she said firmly, her voice sharp with frustration, "that I, Akwanwa, refuses to honor his request. Tell him I'm done taking his insults." Her eyes blazed with defiance as she stood tall, not willing to let Ikemefuna push her around anymore. The servant's face grew pale, and he nervously wrung his hands. "Please," he whispered, glancing around as if expecting Ikemefuna to appear at any moment. "He said he would cut off my head if I don't bring you with me." Before Akwanwa could respond, Aduli, her mother, quickly intervened, her face filled with worry. "Please, my child, you've heard what he said. Go with him. I know you don't want Ikemefuna to cut off his head." He wouldn't take disobedience lightly, and we don't want any trouble. Just go, and the food will be ready by the time you return. Aquam sighed deeply, feeling the weight of her mother's words. She didn't want to go, but she knew her refusal would only cause more problems for her family. Reluctantly, she nodded and followed the servant out, her heart heavy with frustration. When Aquam arrived at Ikemefuna's compound, she found him punishing his servants as usual. His angry voice boomed across the yard as he scolded them harshly, and the servants stood trembling before him, fearful of his wrath. Aquam's anger flared up even more at the sight of his cruelty. Without even thinking, she stormed towards him, her hands on her hips, and forgot to greet him out of sheer frustration. "Why did you send for me?" she demanded, her voice sharp and filled with irritation. Ikemefuna slowly looked her up and down, his face twisted in displeasure. "I can see that your parents did not raise you well," he sneered. "By the time I marry you, I will teach you a bitter lesson. I will give you proper home training, something you clearly lack." His words were cold and his eyes gleamed with arrogance as he spoke. Aquam wasn't moved by his threats. She stood her ground, her voice strong and unwavering. "I still demand to know why you called me here," she said again, refusing to back down. "It's good you are eager to know," Ikemefuna said, his voice dripping with arrogance. "And I will get straight to the point. It's about that good-for-nothing, that poverty-stricken fool who follows you around the village like a cock chasing a hen. What's that his name again? I don't even remember the names of animals. But you know who I'm talking about. I don't ever want to see the two of you together again." His voice was filled with contempt as he spat out the words. Aquam's eyes widened in shock. "What?" she exclaimed, unable to believe his demand. "That's not even possible." Ikemefuna stood up from where he was sitting, his face darkening with anger. "What did you just say?" "I said that's not possible," Aquam repeated firmly, her voice defiant. "Nothing can separate me from Akuna, not even you." Without another word, she turned sharply and stormed out of the compound, her heart racing with anger. She could hear Ikemefuna's voice roaring behind her, his words filled with fury. "How dare you walk out on me? How dare you?" Furious, Ikemefuna turned to his servant and barked, "Go after her. Bring her back and lay her on the floor." The servants, terrified of their master's rage, quickly ran after Aquam. She struggled against them, trying to escape, but they overpowered her, dragging her back to Ikemefuna. Once they brought her back, they forced her to the ground, holding her there. Ikemefuna approached her, his face filled with anger. He kicked her to the ground, and then, with a long, thick whip, he began flogging her mercilessly. "You dare disobey Ikemefuna," he thundered. As he raised the whip again and again, each strike was filled with his rage, and he showed no mercy as he continued to punish her. Her cries pierced the air with each painful stroke from Ikemefuna's whip. The stinging lashes struck her back and legs, and she sobbed uncontrollably, her body trembling with pain. When Ikemefuna was finally done, he coldly told his servants to let her go. Aquam stumbled to her feet, her body aching with bruises, and began her long tear-filled walk home. As soon as she entered her family's compound, her mother Aduli saw her and rushed to her side, panicking. Fear gripped her heart. "Aquam," she cried out, her voice trembling. "What happened to you?" Aquam could barely speak through her sobs. "It's Ikemefuna," she managed to say, her words broken by the pain. He laid me on the floor and flogged me like a child." "Mama, Ikemefuna flogged me like a child." Aduli's eyes widened in horror as she looked at the swollen red marks covering her daughter's body. Her heart filled with rage. "What?" she screamed. "Nai! Nai!" she called to her husband, her voice shaking with anger. Aduli came out of the hut, rushing. alarmed by his wife's scream. The moment he saw Akwanwa's bruised and beaten body, his face turned pale with shock. "Look at what Ikemefuna has done to our daughter," Adani cried, her voice trembling with fury. "He hasn't even married her yet, and he's already treating her like this. What will happen when they are married? What kind of life will she have?" Aduli stood there silent and confused, his mind racing. Finally he asked, "What did you do, Akwanwa? Why would he do this to you?" Through her tears, Akwanwa explained, "He told me to stay away from Akuna, and I refused." Adule's face tightened in frustration. "It's your fault," he snapped. "How could you refuse your husband's orders?" Adane's eyes flashed with anger. "No, you are wrong, Ikim," she shouted. "How can you say this? Ikemefuna is not even married to her yet, and he already thinks he owns her. Is this the life you want for our daughter? He hasn't paid her bride price, but he's already beating her as if he has the right. Does he want to kill her before he marries her? You should be at Ikemefuna's house now, demanding answers and not blaming her." Akwanwa cried even harder. "Father, are you only saying this because of his money?" she asked, her voice filled with hurt. Aduli, caught between guilt and confusion, turned and stormed out of the compound, heading straight for Ikemefuna's house. He knew he had to confront the man who had hurt his daughter, but his mind was torn between anger and the fear of losing the wealth Ikemefuna promised. "Ikemefuna! Ikemefuna!" Aduli shouted angrily as he stormed Ikemefuna's compound. His voice echoed through the yard, filled with fury. He didn't care who heard him. His daughter had been beaten, and he wasn't going to stay silent. Inside his hut, Ikemefuna heard the shouting and stepped out, his face twisted in annoyance. "Who is that mad dog shouting my name?" he growled, looking around. When he spotted Aduli, his expression changed slightly, but not with kindness. "Oh, it's you, Aduli," he sneered. "When did you become mad?" Aduli stood his ground, his fist clenched. "I won't take any insult from you, Ikemefuna," he shot back, his voice trembling with anger. Ikemefuna smiled, his arms crossed over his chest. "And who do you think you are?" he asked, his voice dripping with arrogance. "Remember where I found you, Aduli? You were nothing but a beggar in rags, and I cleaned you up. I gave you lands, money and power. Now you've eaten well, and you think you have the strength to stand here and challenge me." Adule's anger flared even more, but he tried to stay focused on why he was there. "Ikemefuna," he said, his voice tense. "Why did you lay your hands on my daughter? Is this how you plan to marry her? What did she do to deserve such treatment from you?" Ikemefuna's eyes darkened. "I can do whatever I like with her," he said coldly. "You didn't raise that girl properly. She dared to disobey me. And then she walked out on me like she had the right. Who does she think she is?" Adule's heart pounded in his chest as he stepped forward. "Ikemefuna," he warned, his voice shaking with frustration. "If you don't watch your actions, I will put an end to this engagement. You won't marry my daughter if you continue treating her this way." At that, Ikemefuna threw his head back and let out a loud mocking laugh. The sound echoed through the compound, cold and heartless. When he finally stopped, he looked at Aduli with a wicked smile. "If you dare do that, you will return everything I've given you," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "All my lands, my money, my goats, my yams, every single thing I've provided for you. And not just that, I will strip you of your Ozo title. By the time I'm done with you, the villagers will laugh at you and you will be nothing again, Aduli." Adule's face fell, his anger melting into fear. His chest tightened and he felt trapped. The life Ikemefuna had given him flashed before his eyes. The land, the wealth, the respect, everything he had gained in the village. He knew Ikemefuna wasn't bluffing. If he lost everything, he would be worse off than before, and worst was that he could not even pay them back. In an instant, Aduli's anger turned to desperation. "Ah, my in-law," he said, his tone changing quickly as he tried to calm the situation. "It hasn't gotten to that. Please, let's not take it that far. I will go home and speak to Akwanwa. I will train her very well, I promise. I will warn her to stay away from Akuna, and she will never disobey you again." Ikemefuna's eyes gleamed with victory, and a satisfied smile spread across his face. "Now you are talking," he said smugly, stepping back with his arms crossed, pleased with how easily he won the argument. Feeling defeated and humiliated, Aduli turned and slowly made his way back home. His heart heavy. He had come to defend his daughter, but now he was leaving powerless and ashamed. He felt trapped by Ikemefuna's power and wealth, knowing that his family was stuck in this union, no matter how much it hurt them. A deep sadness settled in his chest as he realized that despite everything, there was nothing he could do. They were bound to Ikemefuna, and it seemed like there was no way out. When Akuna came by in the evening and saw the bruises on Akwanwa's body, his heart filled with rage. His usually calm eyes burned with fury as he rushed to her side, his fists clenched tightly. "Who did this to you?" he demanded angrily, his voice trembling with a mix of anger and concern. "It's Ikemefuna," Akwanwa said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. Her whole body still ached from the whipping, and she winced as she spoke. At the mention of Ikemefuna's name, Akuna's temper flared even more. "Hey! Ikemefuna has touched the lion's tail," he roared, pacing back and forth, his anger boiling over. "How dare he? How dare he lay his filthy hands on you? Doesn't he know you are a princess? I can't take this. I will deal with him. I will beat him like a small baby." He punched the air, his voice echoing with fury. Akwanwa reached out, placing a trembling hand on his arm. "Please, Akuna, calm down," she pleaded, her eyes filled with worry. "You know our family owes him so much. We can't repay him. Please, don't make things worse. Just let me touch him, even if it's just little." Akuna growled through clenched teeth, his hands shaking with a desire to confront Ikemefuna. "Akuna, no," Akwanwa cried, her voice desperate. "It will only make things worse. We are poor and we can't fight against him. Ikemefuna is too powerful. I don't want you to get hurt." Akuna's fist tightened even more, his face red with rage. "I feel like strangling him right now. Is it because he has money? Is it because he has money?" he shouted, his voice rising. "Is that why he thinks he can do whatever he wants?" "What are you saying, Akuna?" Akwanwa asked, her voice soft and confused. Akuna's eyes softened, but his words carried the weight of his long-hidden feelings. "Ikemefuna doesn't deserve you," he said quietly, his anger giving way to deep emotion. "I love you, Akwanwa. I always have. I can marry you and take better care of you than he ever will." Akwanwa's eyes widened in shock. "What? What did you just say?" she asked, unable to believe her ears. "I said I can marry you," Akuna repeated, his voice firmer now. "I can marry you and give you the love you deserve." Akwanwa was stunned. She had never expected to hear these words from Akuna, her closest friend, the one she had always seen as a brother. As she lay in bed that night, her mind raced. She couldn't stop thinking about what Akuna had said. His confession played over and over in her head, and she found herself feeling confused, unsure of how to respond. Did she feel the same way? Could she imagine a life without Akuna by her side? A few days later, after her body had healed a bit and she felt stronger, Aquanwa decided to visit Akuna. She longed to talk to him. As she stepped outside, she saw her father Aduli sitting quietly in front of their hut. "Where are you going?" he asked her, his voice soft but tired. "Father, I'm going to visit Akuna," Aquanwa replied, trying to sound casual. Aduli sighed deeply, his eyes filled with sadness. "Come sit with me," he said gently, parting the space between them. Aquanwa hesitated for a moment, but then she sat down. She could feel something heavy in the air, something her father was struggling to say. "I think it's time to cut off your relationship with Akuna," Aduli said quietly, his voice full of sorrow. Tears welled up in Aquanwa's eyes. She stared at her father in disbelief. "Father, Akuna is the only friend and brother I have. You can't say this to me. Please, don't make me do this." Aduli looked down, his hands trembling slightly. "I know it hurts," he said, his voice breaking. "But you need to make this work with Ikemefuna. He has made it clear he doesn't want Akuna near you, and you have to obey him. I'm scared, Aquanwa. Where will we get all the money to pay Ikemefuna back if things fall apart? Please, for your sake and for your family's sake, listen to me." Tears streamed down Aquanwa's face. Her heart felt like it was being ripped apart. She had never imagined a life where Akuna wasn't by her side. The thought of losing him made her feel empty inside, like a part of her was being taken away. She stood up slowly, unable to speak, and walked inside her hut. She collapsed onto her bed, crying until she felt physically sick. Meanwhile, Akuna was struggling with his own emotions. Ever since he had confessed his love to Aquanwa, he had avoided her, too ashamed of his outburst. He had loved her for so long, ever since they were children, but he had always kept it hidden, telling himself that they were like siblings. It had been easier that way, easier to hide his feelings behind the mask of brotherly affection. But now the truth was out, and he didn't know how Aquanwa felt or how to face her again. Days passed, and when Aquanwa didn't come to see him, Akuna grew worried. He couldn't bear the thought of leaving things like this. He decided to go to her house and apologize, to tell her that he hadn't meant to say those words. He just wanted to make things right. When he arrived at her house, Aduli and Adani were sitting outside, talking quietly. As soon as Aquanwa heard Akuna's voice, she came out, her eyes filled with deep sadness. Akuna's heart ached when he saw the pain in her eyes. He opened his mouth to speak, but before he could utter any word, Aduli stood up and called him aside. "I'm sorry, Akuna," Aduli began, his voice shaky. "You've been like a son to me, but it hurts me to say this. I want you to stop coming here until Aquanwa is married." The words hit Akuna like a punch to the chest. His heart sank. "Father, please," Aquanwa cried, her voice trembling. "Don't do this." But Aduli shook his head sadly. "I have to do this for her sake," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Please, Akuna, understand." Akuna felt like his world was crumbling around him. He had loved Aquanwa for as long as he could remember, but now everything was slipping away. He looked at her one last time, her tear-filled eyes breaking his heart, before turning and walking away, feeling as if he had lost everything that mattered. For days, both Akuna and Aquanwa were consumed by sorrow. They refused to eat, and their hearts were weighed down by sadness. Aquanwa sat beneath the old tree in front of their hut, tears endlessly flowing through her cheeks. She couldn't find the strength to smile or even speak. Her body was there, but her mind felt like it was drowning in the heaviness of everything that had happened. Meanwhile, Akuna stayed in front of his own hut from morning until night, his once strong hands hanging limply by his side. He had stopped going hunting, and he no longer showed up to work at a cheese farm. It was as if his spirit had been crushed, and he couldn't summon the will to do anything. If only you had listened to me when I told you to stay away from Aquam, you wouldn't be in this mess, Wanyoma, Akuna's mother said to him as she watched her son in his misery. Look at how Aduli insulted you. Look at what he said to you. But Akuna didn't say a word. He just sat there staring into the distance, his mind clouded with thoughts of Aquanwa. Days had passed and he had not seen her, which was the longest they had ever been apart. He couldn't bear it any longer. He worried if she was okay, if she was hurting as much as he was. His heart told him she was. He decided that he would sneak over to her compound at evening, just to catch a glimpse of her. He needed to know if she was okay, even if that meant only peeking from afar. Meanwhile, Ikemefuna had sent his servants once again to summon Aquanwa as he usually did. But this time, Aquanwa was done with him. When the servant arrived and delivered the message, Aquanwa's anger surged through her. "Tell your master, I would rather die than come to his house," she shouted, her voice filled with bitterness and frustration. She couldn't stand the thought of being near Ikemefuna, not after all he had done to her. The servant, visibly nervous, begged her, "Please, my master will kill me if I return without you. I'm only a messenger. Please come with me." Aduli, seeing the situation unfold, intervened. "Tell him Aquanwa is sick," he suggested. Reluctantly, the servant nodded and left to carry the message back to Ikemefuna. When Ikemefuna received the news, his face turned red with rage. "You are very stupid," he barked at the servants. "You should have dragged her here. So Aduli and his family think they can play with me. I will show them." His voice was full of venom, and his mind filled with thoughts of revenge. "By the time I marry Aquanwa, I will teach her a bitter lesson," he muttered to himself, his eyes dark with anger. Without wasting another moment, Ikemefuna gathered his servants and stormed off towards Aduli's compound. As they arrived, Aquanwa was just about to enter their hut when Ikemefuna grabbed her arm, yanking her back forcefully. "So you dare defy my orders," he barked, his grip tightening on her arm. "Leave me alone. Leave me alone," Aquanwa cried, struggling to free herself. Her cries of distress echoed through the compound, and soon Aduli and his wife came rushing out, their faces filled with fear and confusion. "What is happening?" Adani shouted, her voice trembling. "What are you doing to my daughter?" "Stay out of this," Ikemefuna thundered, his voice booming. He then commanded his servants, "Take her, carry her and follow me." But Aduli had reached his breaking point. He could no longer stand by and watch his daughter be treated like a piece of property. Summoning all his courage, he threw himself between Ikemefuna and Aquanwa, blocking their way. "Ikemefuna, where do you think you are taking my daughter to?" he demanded, his voice shaking but firm. Ikemefuna turned to him with a mocking sneer. "So the chicken dares to challenge me now," he taunted. Then without a second thought, he turned to his servants. "Beat him up. Teach him what happens when he stands in my way." The servants wasted no time. They descended upon Aduli, punching and kicking him without mercy. Aduli, though strong in spirit, was no match for their numbers, and he fell to the ground, beaten and bruised. Just then, Akuna arrived, drawn by the sounds of the commotion. The sight of Aduli being attacked and Aquam screaming for help sent a surge of fury through his vein. Without hesitation, he charged at the servants, his fist flying. With a strength fueled by pure anger, Akuna beat them up one by one, throwing them to the ground. They tried to fight back, but they were no match for his rage. Once he had dealt with the servants, Akuna turned his attention to Ikemefuna. His eyes blazed with a fire that had been simmering for too long. "Oh, I have been waiting for this day," Akuna said, his voice low and dangerous. "A day when I could beat you up like a baby and make you eat sand." Ikemefuna, though trying to appear unbothered, was clearly rattled. "Who do you think you are?" he sneered. "I will crush you with one hand." "Ikemefuna, you are a big fool. I agree that you have more wealth than I, but I will beat you up like a baby." Before Ikemefuna could say anything else, Akuna grabbed him, lifted him off the ground with ease. In one swift move, he slammed Ikemefuna to the ground, and then he began throwing punches on him, each one harder than the last. All of Akuna's pent-up anger, frustration and pain flowed through his fist as he hit Ikemefuna again and again. Ikemefuna, once so proud and powerful, was helpless under Akuna's assault. By the time Akuna was done with him, Ikemefuna and his servants were barely able to stand. They limped away, bruised and broken, struggling to make their way home. Akuna sat in front of his hut, his heart racing with fear and regret. What had he just done? He had beaten up the powerful Ikemefuna, the richest man in the village. How would he face the consequences of his actions now? He knew deep down that he shouldn't have let his anger get the better of him. But he couldn't stand by and watch Aquam or anyone in her family be hurt. His love for her was too strong, and seeing her in pain had driven him to act without thinking. But now, as the reality of his actions sank in, he felt the weight of what he had done crushing him. What had he gotten himself into? As Akuna sat there lost in his thoughts, his hands trembling slightly, a messenger from Ichie's farm arrived. The man approached him quietly, looking serious. "Ichie also has sent for you," the worker said, his tone firm. "He wants to see you immediately." Akuna's heart sank further. He hadn't been to the farm in days, ever since the chaos with Aquam and Ikemefuna had begun. Now he feared the worst. What if Ichie was going to fire him? He could feel everything slipping away. His livelihood, his peace, even his chance to be with Aquam. He quickly stood up and followed the messenger, his mind racing with fear and uncertainty. When they arrived at Ichie's compound, Akuna was greeted by the sight of Ichie sitting calmly in front of his hut. His face was gentle, but unreadable. Akuna bowed slightly as he greeted him. "You sent for me, sir," he said, his voice shaky. "Yes, son," Ichie replied, motioning for him to sit down. "Come sit with me." Akuna hesitated for a moment, then sat down, feeling the heavy weight of the situation pressing on his shoulders. Ichie looked at him closely, noticing the sadness in his eyes. "How are you, Akuna? I haven't seen you at the farm in days. Is everything all right?" Akuna looked down, unsure of how to respond. He didn't know how to explain all that had been happening. He was overwhelmed by everything. His fight with Ikemefuna, his growing love for Aquam, and the fear that he might lose everything. Finally, after a long pause, he muttered, "I'm so sorry, Ichie." His voice was barely above a whisper. Ichie gave him a small knowing smile, as if he already understood more than Akuna was saying. "Akuna," he said gently, "are you lovesick? Is it that girl you're always with? Do you love her?" Akuna's heart skipped a beat. This was the first time anyone had directly asked him about his feelings for Aquanwa. And for the first time, he didn't hide behind the excuse that she was his sister. He didn't need to pretend anymore. Slowly he nodded, feeling a wave of emotion wash over him. "I love her," Akuna said, his voice filled with sincerity. "I love her so much." Ichie smiled warmly. "Then why haven't you told her?" he asked gently. Akuna looked away, his face filled with sadness. "I don't deserve her," he admitted. "She needs a man who can take good care of her. I'm just but a poor hunter and farmer. I have nothing to offer her." Ichie was silent for a moment, thinking carefully before he spoke again. "Let me tell you something, Akuna," he said quietly. "I married my wife when I had just little. But we were both so happy together because we loved each other so much. It's so unfortunate," he lamented sadly, as if remembering something. "Many years ago, my wife and children died in the war. I lost everything that mattered to me. Now, I'm old and alone." His voice softened with sorrow. "I have plenty of lands, as you know. I have the largest farm in this kingdom, more livestock than I could ever need. And in my room, there is a pit filled with money, gold, silver and treasures that could last your family for generations. I have no one to leave it to, no one to pass it on to." He paused, his eyes filled with a deep sadness. "I have lived a long life, but it has been an unhappy one without my family." Akuna listened in stunned silence, unable to believe what he was hearing. But why was Ichie telling him all this? "You've been so good to me, Akuna, working selflessly, always looking out for me. And I think you deserve this. I am willing all my possessions to you," Ichie continued, his voice steady. "Everything I own, all my lands, my money, my livestock, it will be yours. With these, you can take care of Aquanwa. Don't let that lunatic Ikemefuna have her. She deserves better." Tears filled Akuna's eyes as the weight of Ichie's words sank in. It was too good to be true. He couldn't believe what he was hearing. The man who had once hired him to work in the fields was now offering him a life he had never dreamed of. His suffering, his poverty, his constant struggle, everything was about to change. "I have only one request," Ichie continued. "I would like you to give me a befitting burial when I die. Bury me here in my compound, by the graves of my wife and children." Akuna nodded. "I will honor your request." "Thank you, Ichie," Akuna whispered through his tears. "Thank you so much," he kept repeating the words, overwhelmed by gratitude. His heart felt light for the first time in what seemed like forever. Finally, he would be able to care for Aquanwa the way he had always wanted to. His suffering had come to an end, and for the first time he saw a future filled with hope. Ikemefuna sat in the corner of his compound fuming with anger as he recounted the beating he received from Akuna to his friend Izuna. His pride was bruised, even more than his body, and the memory of what happened replayed in his mind over and over. Can you imagine, he spat angrily. That Akuna lifted me up and threw me to the ground like I was nothing. Me, Ikemefuna, the mighty Odogu of this village, tossed aside like a sack of yam. And as if that was not enough, he pounced on me like a wild animal and beat the hell out of me. He gave me the beating of my life. He beat me, Ikemefuna. His voice was thick with outrage. Izuna, who had been quietly listening, couldn't resist asking, "Were his punches really that painful?" Ikemefuna shot him an angry glare, almost too furious to speak. "Are you crazy?" he snapped. "Can't you see the bruises on me? Of course they were painful. That fool made me look like a weakling." His face twisted with fury as he continued, "Just wait until I marry Akwanwa. She will see what the fire does to the ears of a rabbit. I will make her regret ever going against me." Just as Ikemefuna finished his rant, they both noticed a large truckload of goods arriving at his compound. Food items, clothes, jewelry, and many other gifts were being unloaded. Confused, Ikemefuna and Izuna exchanged puzzled glances. "What's going on?" Ikemefuna muttered. Two messengers approached them, bowing slightly before speaking. "These gifts are from Mazi Aduli," one of the messengers announced. "He said he has returned all the gifts you gave to his family, along with double the amount in food, clothing, and jewelry. He has also returned the lands where he cultivates, every single thing you gave to them. Mazi Azule also said he's no longer interested in you marrying his daughter Akwanwa, and that you should stay away from his family." Ikemefuna's face turned pale. "What?" he bellowed, his voice rising in disbelief. "This is a big lie. A big fat lie." His hands trembled as he looked at the mountains of gifts and the messengers who stood before him. He couldn't believe what he was hearing. How could Aduli say such a thing? How could he return everything and break off the engagement? His mind swelled with confusion. How did Aduli make all this money overnight? Ikemefuna asked himself, the question spinning in his head. He had always believed that Adule's family was poor, dependent on him for everything. How did they suddenly become so wealthy? The realization hit him like a heavy blow. He had lost Akwanwa. He had been so arrogant, thinking he was the richest and most powerful man in the village, unaware that there were others hidden in plain sight who even had more than him. Tears welled up in Ikemefuna's eyes. He had been so sure of himself that he would marry Akwanwa and show her who was in charge. But now all his pride and arrogance had crumbled. He had lost Akwanwa to Akuna, the very man he had mocked and underestimated. His heart ached with regret, and he was filled with a sense of emptiness he had never felt before. A few months later, a grand celebration was taking place in the village. Akuna was getting married to his childhood sweetheart, Akwanwa. The village burst with excitement and joy. Akwanwa's happiness was beyond words. It wasn't because Akuna had suddenly become wealthy, but because she had realized during their brief time apart that her feelings for Akuna went deeper than she ever imagined. What she had felt for him wasn't just the love of his sister for her brother. No, it was something much stronger. She had always been in love with him. There was no way she could live her life without him by her side. Akwanwa smiled endlessly, her heart bursting with joy as she thought about Akuna. He wasn't just her childhood friend, he was her soulmate, the one who had always been there for her, the one who truly understood her. Akuna was her happiness, and she knew deep in her heart that only he could love and care for her the way she deserved. As the two stood together during the celebration, their eyes locking, and Akuna, overwhelmed with emotion, whispered, "Aquam, you don't know how many times I've dreamed of this day. I never thought it would come true." Akwanwa laughed softly, her heart swelling with love. "And yet here we are," she replied, her eyes twinkling with joy. The entire village celebrated with them, happy for the couple who had finally found their way to each other. Aduli and Adani, Akwanwa's parents, could barely contain their joy. They were so proud to have Akuna as their son-in-law. They couldn't have asked for a better match for their beloved daughter. The celebration was filled with laughter, dancing, and songs of praise. It was a day the village would never forget. But as the sounds filled the village, Ikemefuna sat alone in his hut, mourning the life he could have had. The weight of his loss pressed down on him like a heavy stone. He had lost Akwanwa forever, and the pain was unbearable. He couldn't even face Akuna, who had become wealthier than him, a man he once looked down on. Tears rolled down his cheeks as he sat in silence, consumed by regret. He had been reduced to a laughingstock in the village, and his arrogance had cost him everything. Akwanwa, he whispered, his voice filled with sorrow as he cried alone in his empty hut. And so, after their beautiful wedding, Akuna and Akwanwa lived happily ever after, their love stronger than ever. They built a life filled with joy, laughter, and the happiness that comes from being with the one person who truly understands you. They were surrounded by love, and their bond grew deeper with each passing day. It was a love story that the village would talk about for generations to come. Hey besties, this has really been a long one, but I bet that you are going to enjoy the story. Thank you for watching this amazing story, and I really hope that you enjoyed it as much as we enjoyed making it. I would like you to share your lessons in the comments section. And if you enjoy watching stories in this channel and you are yet to subscribe, do not forget to hit the subscribe button and turn on your notification bells so that you get to watch more amazing stories from us. Thank you so much for all your love, your support, everything. It's been wonderful. Thank you for all your beautiful comments. I read them all and they make me feel so happy. I can't thank you enough. But right now, I'll have to go and see you in our next story. Bye!